Good evening. On behalf of KPCC and Southern California Public Radio, welcome to the Crawford Family Forum. For tonight's program, from burning bras to hot debate, is feminism doing right by women today? And now, your host for this evening's conversation, writer and journalist, Joanne Griffith.
Well, what a warm welcome. Thank you all so much for coming to the Crawford Family Forum tonight to talk about feminism. Where are we at with it today? What is the state of feminism? I have to say, if we have any gentlemen in the house, could you raise your hands for a second? I think a round of applause for the gentlemen tonight. We will be talking about not just what it means to be a woman and be a feminist, but also what it means to be a man and a feminist. Some people may question, can a man be a feminist? And you gentlemen, we hope that we'll hear some responses from you tonight as well. I do want to introduce our panel, first of all, and a real big thanks to Elaine Char for bringing all of these wonderful women together. It's difficult to get two people in a room on one particular night any time of the year, and Elaine managed to get all six of us. So a big thank you to Elaine for that, and a big thank you to everyone who also is watching us on the live stream. So let's start right over here on the far side. We have Wendy Carrillo. She's a journalist with Power 106 FM, Knowledge is Power host, politics and culture commentator, a communications professional, and you can also follow her on Twitter. If you have your mobile devices on you, do kind of get busy with the Twitter too, take some pictures and let everyone know what we're doing. Welcome to you, Wendy. Thanks for joining us. We also have Mona Ebrahim. She's a multimedia professional, a designer, a writer. She's also author of 101 Reasons Why I'm Glad to Wear a Hijab. She's also a mother as well, a huge job in and of itself, and she managed to get here tonight too. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Mona. We have Roxane Gay. She's a writer, a professor, a regular contributor to Salon, to BuzzFeed, New York Times Book Review. She's the author of not one, but two, folks, new books that are coming out this year. One is Untamed State and also Bad Feminist. Good evening to you, Roxane. We also have, this is a long list of women. We also have Lindsey Horvath. She's a vice president of communication at Nation Builder. She's a former West Hollywood City Council member. She's also a women's empowerment and anti-violence advocate. Thank you so much for joining us, Lindsey. And last but certainly not least, because she wears fabulous glasses, is Christina Wong. She is an internationally presented solo performer, a writer, cultural commentator. Her shows include Wong Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, like what she did there. Also, Going Green the Wong Way and Wong Street Journal, which premieres next year. Thanks for joining us,
Thank
Christina.
you.
So a lot to get through tonight. Now, when you all came in this evening, were you given a sticker? All right, we'll move on from that then. We were going to do something really fun with all the stickers, but seeing as you don't have them, we'll move on from that. But when a lot of you would have gone online to register for this event, you may have noticed that we had a little quiz. And it's in the style of BuzzFeed, if you ever read BuzzFeed and kill a lot of work hours looking on something like BuzzFeed. But there was a little kind of quiz there which kind of gave you an idea of what kind of feminist you are. Did any of you ladies take that particular quiz?
I like that you almost called it butt feed. That's
I was very
careful for that
BuzzFeed.
But there are five questions, because that's all it takes is 5 questions to figure out what kind of feminist you are.
Yeah, it's that simple. And then world peace.
None of which had any answers that I thought suited me. But I somehow ended up being an accidental feminist, and it was a picture of someone on a motorcycle.
Not for you? Lindsey, how about you?
Well, I was the powerful feminist, which was, I think the photo was Hillary Clinton. But one of the questions asked something about what you wear, and it said either a dress or skinny jeans. So I thought about Hillary Clinton and skinny jeans and thought, well, how did we link those two things up? So I'm not quite sure how we got there, but there you have it.
Roxane?
I didn't take the quiz. I know what kind of feminist I am.
Mona, how about you?
I ended up with Hillary Clinton as well, and a lot of them kind of seemed like, what does this have to do with feminism whatsoever? But I think we were talking earlier about how, a lot of times perhaps we make it we simplify it too much, and it's much deeper than just that.
Wendy?
I ended up with sex-positive feminism, which I really loved. And one of the questions was, who's on your playlist? And automatically I saw Beyonce. I was like, click, Beyonce. So yes, so I thought it was actually really kind of affirmed a few things.
Yeah, I also turned out to be Hillary Clinton as well. I do not own a trouser suit, just for the record. They don't see me. But you could have been a sex-positive feminist, which akin to a Madonna or Anais Nin, a conservative feminist like Anne Romney or Sarah Palin, an activist feminist like Susan B. Anthony or Brad and Angelina, an accidental feminist, as we mentioned, like a Ryan Gosling or a Pope Francis, or a power feminist, think Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, or Marissa Mayer. No matter how, we may make fun or try to simplify what it means to be a feminist, the fact is that we've invited you all here because all of you in some way, shape or form identify with being a feminist. Christina, starting with you first, what was your road to being a feminist? What was that moment where you were like, oh, I think I might be a feminist?
Well, as the East Asian contingent of this panel, all my answers represent just me. It's a lot of pressure sometimes, being the token on a panel. But
you wear it well.
but I guess my moment, I grew up in San Francisco, and I went to this kindergarten where when we got in, we were always watching cartoons in the morning before we did the Pledge of Allegiance, and the toys that had commercials were very gendered, so it'd be like G.I. Joe toys or like Barbie toys, and the boys in the room would like yeah to the G.I. Joe commercials, like they would get so into it. And then when the girl toy, I'm doing air quotes for the radio people, the girl toy commercials came on, they were boo, boo, and the women would just, the girls would quietly sit there, and I remember trying to organize at 6 years old, organize the girls. No, when their commercials play, we're gonna boo them, and we're gonna go yeah to like our commercials, because I just, the aggression was so bizarre to me. And I think that's sort of where my early performance artist stuff came from.
Lindsey, how about you?
I don't know that it was a singular moment, but looking back on some memories that I think sort of speak to my ever-developing feminism. When I was in kindergarten, I guess there's a thing about kindergarten. I don't know. When I was in kindergarten, I was the only girl who was asked to be part of a computer science fair. And I learned, one of my classmates, his mom took my teacher, was out in the hall with my teacher and said she can't go to that because, my son's going to that. And she said, well, everyone can go. And she said, yeah, but she's a girl. And I thought, well, why can't I go? Just because I'm a girl, I can't go. And so it was very odd to me. I couldn't understand her rationale. But then later in high school, I moved from a small town in near Cleveland, Ohio, to Las Vegas. And I was sitting there my sophomore year, and we were in American history class, and my teacher said, 1920, what does that strike for anyone? Does that ring a bell? And I sat there thinking to myself, 1920, this doesn't spark anything for anyone. And I thought to myself, 19th Amendment, women get the right to vote. Really? This isn't ringing a bell for anyone? And then I realized all of that I had actually said out loud. And so my classmates looked at me and thought, and somebody said, she's the feminazi. And that's when I was like, I didn't know that just being aware of American history made me a feminazi, but, maybe you should be a little more educated.
Roxanne, and actually, and all three of you, I know when we were talking before, had kind of quoted your mothers as big inspirations as to why you identify as feminist now. Roxanne, could you expand a little more on that?
Yeah, definitely. My mother would never say that she's a feminist, and in fact, when she still says the word, there's some disdain there. But my mother is the fiercest feminist I know. And I'm the only girl, so I have two brothers, and frankly, if you don't grow up feminist in that situation, you never will. But my mom, when I was growing up, wouldn't teach me how to cook, so that's been awkward. And she didn't want me to do anything domestic, and she did teach my brothers to cook. And she wouldn't let me play with Barbie dolls. And I realized that she was really sort of trying to keep me away from gendered roles so that I could figure out for myself what I wanted to be. And it was always unspoken. And so I don't have a specific moment when I realized I was a feminist. I just always was, because my mother is just amazing. And she just called, and that's why my phone was buzzing. Haitian parents never let go. It's very good. But, you know, she's just always modeled that a woman is equal to a man, and frankly, my father has also modeled the same thing, because she totally runs him. And, you know, it's when you're lucky enough to be raised in that kind of environment, your feminism is as secondary to your nature as breathing.
Mona?
Yeah, I can definitely echo that as well. Besides the fact that I grew up playing with G.I. Joe and ripping the heads off of my Barbies, and then making clothes for her because I didn't like what she came with. Basically, same thing. I grew up, me and my sister, and no boys, and so my father pretty much raised us just like boys. He taught us how to fix pretty much everything, and I was never really raised to be, you know, what a girl is supposed to be. There was never any kind of gender constructions that I had to fit into. I had no choice but to go to one of the best colleges and, you know, become a doctor. And this was my father's vision for us, and we really didn't.
Doctor, lawyer, engineer.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, being a housewife was not in the picture whatsoever. So I just, again, I was born this way, as we were saying earlier, you know, I was always like that, you know, and always when the men had their political discussions, you know, whenever we'd have families invited over, I always wanted to kind of be in that, you know, group rather than the women discussing what recipes they just tried out. So I guess that was just always part of who I am.
Wendy?
Well, for myself, to echo Lady Gaga as well, we were talking earlier, it's like I was born this way. I was born a feminist, but I never knew it. And my mother, at the same time, would never admit to being a feminist, but she's the fiercest feminist I know. So we're Salvadorian, and if you know Salvadorian women, it's like we're the fiercest women of them all. And so she has always been incredibly independent. And my grandmother, my grandmother was born in 1933, and she's divorced 3 times. So if you can imagine a woman in El Salvador, in a Latin American country, being divorced, like she was like paving the way. And it's never been an issue of trying to divide, but it's also like being Latina. It's also like, well, when are you going to have kids, and when are you going to get married? But first get your education, and then try to figure out a way when you're going to, you know, balance that in. But it's always been like a situation where the women in my family have been incredibly independent. And my father, when he was 16, coming to the U.S., he was stopped by a shaman who said, "You're going to be surrounded by women who love you all your life." And just a few years later, he met my mom and had 5 girls. So that was his luck. And so he's one of the most pro-feminist men that I know, because he's always been very encouraging in us obtaining our education and making sure that we put ourselves first.
And surrounded by 6 women, he didn't really have a choice.
That too, yeah.
Well, all of us here are writers or work in communication or some kind of creative art, and you always want to start from a place of definition of what something means. And we have the Public Insight Network here at KPCC, and we had a number of people that emailed their responses in to say what they thought feminism was, what the term feminist meant. And we had one man that emailed in and said, you know, feminism is equality for females. Notice I don't say women, which implies age mature. I believe our society begins anti-feminist prejudice tendencies at all ages. Another one here says, feminism is the struggle to dismantle male-centered norms and mores and to increase the agency and empowerment of all people who are not heterosexual, white, male identified. For you ladies, what does the term feminist mean? Actually start in the middle, Roxanne.
Roxanne, what do you think?
I know you've been traveling.
Well, I've had a long day. Started at 3 a.m, but we won't even talk about it. I know, sad story. I live in the country. You know, I think feminism really just means that women are equal to men, and that the concerns of women throughout the world matter, and it's not just women who look a certain way. I think historically, feminism has had a bit of a race problem and a bit of a sexuality problem, where the straight white women went first, and then the rest of us could sort of toddle along when they were ready for us. And so I believe feminism isn't that. I believe that feminism, we rise together, we fall together. And my favorite definition of feminism is one that I read in an anthology, an Australian anthology, and it was, I think, something like a woman who believes that she doesn't deserve to be treated like just for being a woman. And frankly, that's very succinct and captures how I feel about it.
There is an issue, though, that when you say the word feminist, or I am part of the feminist movement, or I support feminism, that it's loaded with negativity. It's loaded with people's images of the past. I know for all the ladies on here, we kind of sent out a little questionnaire before, and it was like, please don't talk about burning bras and feminism. It didn't happen. There was real anger from the ladies here. But actually, before we even get into the rest of it, what are some of the myths of feminism that really just get on your nerves, Christina?
I think that we're all angry, that we hate sex or think all sex is rape, or what are the other cool ones? Our armpit hair goes down to here. For the radio, I'm pointing to my thighs. Just anger and hatred, and then we're all unified, which we're not. Yeah. We're absolutely not in our hatred of men.
And guys, we love you, really. And some of you had also mentioned like some of the ridiculous things that have been said to you when you said, hey, like I'm feminist. Wendy, what are some of the ridiculous nonsense that you've heard as a feminist?
Well, right. It's like, well, you shave your armpits, right? Do you still use deodorant? I was like, yes, I do. And I smell nice. It's okay. But yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions. And I think like one conversation that I had with somebody that I was dating was, well, do you want to get married? Do you want to have children one day? And I said, of course. That doesn't negate, being a feminist doesn't negate me wanting to have a family. And yes, maybe one day I would like to stay at home with my kids. I have the power to choose that I want to do that. And that's an empowerment for myself and for my children. And so it was just like this contradiction that to be a feminist, you cannot be a mother, you cannot be head of household, you cannot have children. So there's a lot of misconceptions.
Anna?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, it always does have a negative connotation, and I'm sensing that it's probably because it's always seen as a very aggressive political thing. Like, oh yeah, all women feel like we are, equal to men at some point. That's pretty much all of us. But why a feminist? So, like we were, mentioning earlier, yeah, all feminists hate men and they're trying to topple them over and so on. And in addition to that, I think just the perception is just that it's overtly political and very aggressive in that sense. And just like Christina was saying, the fact that we aren't unified. And that's, I think, what I would like to see take place too, is just a discussion on how we can unify in what I see feminism as an activist front. And, when we say that we want all women to be treated equally to men, what does that mean? And, what can we do to actually get to that point? We've been trying for so long to get to that point. We've come so far. But truly, what can we do to get to that point? It's not only discussing men and women. There's other issues like discussing poverty and discussing oppression and politics. There's so many things to discuss that come into the play. War, all these things come into the play to actually, what actually the oppression upon girls and women results from these things.
But I think the power of those stereotypes exists because we give them power. I actually think a lot of people proudly identify as feminists. And in fact, when polled, the majority of Americans actually identify as feminist in terms of what the definition is. They might not use the word, but they definitely agree with those values. And so I think the more we reinforce the burning of bras and all of those horrible stereotypes that absolutely make no sense, we're giving them more power, and and they continue to be the ammunition that's used against us. But I hear a lot of, in particular, young women identifying as feminist because they are growing up in a time where a lot of there are conversations about empowerment that are focused on young women. They're growing up in an era of different kinds of opportunities. And so I actually don't find the word to be as scary as some of what this conversation is alluding to. And in fact, I think a lot of people really embrace the word.
And I embrace the bra burning also, whether it happened or didn't happen. I wanted to go to Berkeley just because I heard that it had happened. So,
Wendy, I think there's a trash can outside. You are at liberty to burn away if you so choose.
I will go to a concert and burn my bra or something.
Just don't do it in here. I don't want facilities.
For people who
chucking
may
this out.
not know what that means, for me, the bra burning really signified just doing away with all the restriction that's put on, imposed on us by, a certain culture or society, And so for me, makeup, high heels, there's so many things that we still, continue to, I feel sometimes be enslaved by, and feel like we have to fulfill these certain things. That's kind of emanates from the same thing. Like, do we just do away with such things? Guys don't have to wear bras. Men don't have to.
Some do.
Well, I know exactly. But overall, that's where that came from for those who don't really quite know where that came from. So that's, I think, a lot on a lot of minds sometimes. Like, why do men not have to wear makeup in order to be presentable, in order to be respected as a professional? Things like that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Roxanne.
I would also say that it depends on where you live, because I live in rural America, and feminist is very much a bad word in rural America, and people don't want to claim it. And when you openly say you're a feminist, they look at you like you have 3 heads, and they wonder what's wrong with you. And so I think that speaks to intersectionality, that we forget large swaths of not only this country but the world, where I think feminism is awesome. And I agree, I do see a lot of young women who are claiming it, but I think it's a lot of young women in urban centers, and it's probably middle class women and college educated or in college, because it's less of a pejorative in certain circles, but at least where I live, it's a pejorative, it's a bad word. No one has ever called me a feminist politely. And I'm fine with that. But
you mentioned a word there, intersectionality, which, whenever you read anything about feminism, is all over the place. Can you just explain, for those who may not know, what exactly intersectionality is? What does that mean?
I have no idea.
She just likes to use big words.
I do. It's the college thing. I think it's a word that's being thrown around a lot right now because people are performing their feminism rather than being about feminism. But in its truest form, I think intersectionality is acknowledging that we are composed of a multiplicity of identities, and that we are not only women or men, we have race and ethnicity and gender and class and sexuality and ability, and we have to take into consideration all of these identities as we try to advance our cause. And so we cannot only worry about gender equality, we have to also be worrying about immigration status and poverty and border control and accessibility and education. It's just, it's a big thing. But I also think that it's a little unfair that feminism is expected to clean up the world's mess. And like that, feminism has to be perfect. And that's what I rail against, this idea that as feminists, we have to always be on point. And I think it's great that we hold ourselves to a higher standard, but I mean, come on, the world was a mess before we got here. And I think we have to be realistic about what feminism or any movement can accomplish.
Just to take a quick straw poll of the audience, how many of you who identify as feminists feel a little bit apprehensive about being public about your feminism?
It's okay.
You're in a
radio.
safe space.
Radio. We love you.
So you feel nervous about declaring your feminism. If anyone's brave enough, do you mind if I ask you why? Yeah, at the back. It's the radio, you can't whisper.
Disguise your voice.
Because it has so many different definitions, I don't really want to say that I'm a feminist. I'd rather explain myself and say, this is who I am. It's just like putting an identity label when somebody calls me, Korean or something like that. I'm not Korean. I actually consider myself Blaxican Korean American because I was born and raised in South Los Angeles from a Korean family.
So it's an issue of identity, how other people may stick labels on you perhaps that you don't necessarily want. Another question then, how do people feel about the way that the media portrays feminism? Do you feel that the media is fair to feminism? No. Be collective. No, it's okay. You can speak up. We can hear you. Actually, I want to go to some tape and then we're going to come back and talk about pop culture and how...
Good, because there's not enough pop culture talk.
Yay. Can you see the excitement on Christina's face? She's really
I'm totally excited.
So I think I have a load of bottom. So first of all, there's, the fun thing about preparing for these kind of events is that you get to legitimately sit and look at Facebook and BuzzFeed and Twitter all day long, all in the name of research. And I stumbled across this interview with the singer Katy Perry. She sang California Girls and she was married to Russell Brown.
Never heard of her.
No? Well, guess what? Let's take a little listen to Katy Perry talking about feminism while she was being interviewed on Australian television.
Would you describe yourself as a feminist?
A feminist? Yeah, actually, I used to not really understand what that word meant. And now that I do, it just means that I love myself as a female and I also love men.
That's
so
cool.
sure.
That's really nice.
I am a strong woman.
As a lover of men.
And hear me roar.
And we can all roar if we want to, like Katy Perry. Now, I know all the ladies were just like, oh my gosh, really? Katy Perry? Really? Talking about feminism? Really? What is it?
Not all the ladies. I'm okay with it.
I love Katy Perry.
I think she's fine, but it's...
There was a big eye roll from you, Roxanne.
No, it's the love men part. Like, I have to say I love men so that I can be acceptable and sexually desirable, because feminists are not sexually desirable. I'm sorry, but we are, trust.
But this actually followed on from another conversation that Katy had previously where someone had asked her, would you identify as feminist? And it was kind of like, no. And this is something that's happened with other people. We look at trailblazing female leaders like Marissa Mayer, who was appointed as the president and CEO of Yahoo. In an interview, she said, I don't think I would consider myself a feminist. I think that I certainly believe in equal rights. I believe that women are just as capable, if not more so, in a lot of different dimensions, but I don't think we have sort of the militant drive and the sort of chip on the shoulder that sometimes comes with that. There are amazing opportunities all over the world for women, and I think there is more good that comes out of positive energy around that than negative energy. What damage does it cause to feminism when you have someone say, like Katy Perry, yes, I'm kind of a feminist. Someone like Marissa Mayer, who's in such a powerful position, saying, well, actually, I wouldn't call myself a feminist because that kind of makes me a little bit nervous. It's negative. What damage does that cause, Wendy?
Well, I would say that there's a lot of confusion as to what it is to be a feminist. And there's like first wave, second wave, third wave, women of color, and there's all these different ways that you can identify. And there's obviously misconceptions even from very educated women. And so I think it is a little bit negative, but for those that are working within the fields of academia or within the fields of trying to educate women to speak correctly about feminism, and I get an opportunity to do that on my radio show, and I hope that it's changing just a little bit, but I think it is a tad bit damaging because there's obviously not one definition, but I think if you look at it through the empowerment of women lens, then you truly are a feminist. And we can talk about the glass ceiling versus the concrete ceiling that many women of color face. Like those opportunities to be in that position when you think of a book like Lean In, those are not opportunities that are available to all women. So there are different layers and there's different ways to identify, but I hope that it changes.
Lindsey?
Well, I think it's great to take a look at how feminism is being represented or embodied in the women who are giving those answers. But I think, to your point, a lot of different women identify as feminist, and when we start placing that label on one person and saying, oh, she's a feminist, so this is what feminism is, we're doing exactly what the person back there said, and we're placing a meaning on that label. We're assigning the meaning. But I think what would be more empowering if Marissa Mayer had said she was a feminist, what would that mean for feminism? How would that change the definition? And what would that mean to her? She said she believed in a lot of things that people identify as feminism. She just didn't use the word. And so I think that's what's really interesting to me. When we start to place, say one person represents feminism or another person doesn't represent feminism, but she would if she just said it. I mean, it just gets so complicated, and then there's all of this blaming and shaming women who have trouble with the word, and I'm more interested in the actual execution of equality in our society, however we get there and however we can engage in that conversation.
But isn't part of bringing about that equality also includes people being free to use and label themselves however they so wish without concern about how they'll be treated?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the point she's making is that she gets to define who she is, and she explained what it is she believes, and for her, that the word feminism means a lot of things that it doesn't to other people. And so I think that's part of the conversation. And like I said, I'm more interested in actually engaging in a meaningful dialogue about how we move women forward in society, which I think is what the goal of feminism is. And so we spend a lot of time, shaming women who won't use the word or debating whether the word is useful or not, and I'm more interested in moving us forward.
Sorry, go ahead, Mona.
I would agree. I mean, for me, I don't always throw the word around and say, "Hey, everybody, I'm a feminist." I just do the work. I do what work I can. And that's what everybody should do. Everybody should do what they can to improve the human condition as a whole. And I think the problem that we're facing, especially I think this generation and moving forward, is everyone is just tired of being boxed and pigeonholed. We're tired of being tokenized. We're tired of, I have so many intersectional identities that, I could probably spend all night telling you all the different parts of me, but everybody at face value, they look at me and all of a sudden they just go ahead and draw, a picture of who I am. And you can't do that anymore. We're beyond globalization. We've gone through so much, and there's just so many parts of us. How can we ever be one thing? How can we ever be one word? So I think there's such a frustration with that, with labels.
We talk about, and you just mentioned, sorry, did you have a comment there?
I feel like I have the same relationship with the word feminist as I do with activist or queer. It's that those are parts of who I am, but that there's the immediate connotation of what that means, and I'm always interested in having that be the last thing to invite a conversation about what that word means. And that's a tricky thing, because I think even in progressive circles, even progressive institutions, there is stigma around activist art, or art done by an activist, or she only does Asian American work, like these things. And it's a very insane dance that always has to be done. And so to chime in with that, like, I'm always thinking about how can I define it for myself, and if I take the time to say the word feminist, that I do it through this, and this is the work that I do. It doesn't always look like what you think it looks like.
There is, though, with conversations around feminism, we've kind of touched on it tonight, there are these different intersections, but people will try to label you, or, there's often a discussion around feminism being the preserve of white middle-class women and not necessarily being inclusive of women of colour, of all colours, although really we're all a colour, but anyway, you get my point. But is there a way that, in labeling yourself a feminist, whether you're just doing the work or not, that there's a certain response? So, what is the responsibility around being a feminism? If we're doing the work, as Mona said, what is that work?
I think it varies between different groups. So when I was an undergrad, I was part of a really proud feminist group, and we had this shirt made that said "Mujerista," because I was part of Chicano studies as well. And then I had to explain that I was using like Chicana with an X, so because I was just that more radical than everybody else. And so my what I saw as obligation to feminism was to just inform. I have 4 younger sisters. And so as the first one in my family to go to college and to pave the way, it was like, you won't get the choice of saying, maybe if I go to college, it's when I go to college. And so for me, my obligation was to ensure that my sisters saw that college was attainable. And that was my immediate circle, while other friends were talking about glass ceilings, and they were talking about corporate structure, and they were talking about all these other things that I hadn't even thought about, because my immediate goal was to make sure that I had an education. So I think it varies depending on what circles you're in. And now in a professional environment, it's like, how do we use or how do we see pop culture and icons like J-Lo and Beyonce and Madonna and like all these music or celebrities to define in the way in which they're showing young women what it is to be an empowered woman.
Beyonce in particular has received a lot of flack for saying, I am feminist. A lot of people are very critical of her in terms of the type of lyrics that she may have in her song. I'm thinking specifically of Drunk in Love, and if you don't know the song, there's a reference that her husband makes where he says kind of eat the cake anime, where he's referring to Ike Turner beating up his wife, Tina Turner. And that was a bit that was in the Tina Turner kind of biopic. Because young women do look up to her, well, all women, a lot of women do look up to her, is it right for someone like that to turn around and say, well, hey, well, I'm a feminist, even though my work may not necessarily reflect that? You know, she really was given a really hard time for that, and I'm kind of interested to explore that. Roxanne?
Well, you know, I think that the label helps sometimes because it says I belong to something. Like, community matters for some people, and what Beyonce did, frankly, I think she's done the grandest feminist thing in the past 10 years. I mean, yes, when Jay-Z goes on Drunk in Love, I just mute it. Like, shut up, Jay-Z. I mean, honestly, what was he thinking? What was she thinking in letting those lyrics through? It makes no sense. But
none of the lyrics, not even just the rap bit, none of the lyrics.
We Be All Night, drinking watermelon. Like, how do you drink watermelon?
Oh,
like,
there's a whole other sexual conversation about the lyrics that.
Well, the surfboard. I had to Google it.
Can you send me that when you? Because I.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Someone did like a recreation, and now that I know what it is, I'm like, oh, okay. I don't have
Your
a bathtub
eyes
that
cannot
big.
unsee.
But you know, I think that it's okay to be contradictory. Again, are we expecting? There's this expectation that feminists have to be flawless. See what I did there? If you listen to the album.
That was good.
Thank you. I was proud of it. Yes, that lyric is silly. And you can look at the video where she's like writhing in the water situation and think, But she's being empowered. What is feminist about Beyonce is that she released her album on her own terms without going around the studio system. She runs her entire system. That's empowerment, and that's what's feminist. And I think that we can forgive her, if forgiveness is even required, for having Jay-Z's stupid-ass lyrics. Because of what she represents. And that's why, you know, we were talking about the responsibility. Like, I am a Black woman who teaches writing, and I am a writer, and what I do is make sure that other women can rise along with me. And I think she is very much about helping other women rise along with her. Now, we're not all going to be Queen Bee, but we can aspire.
I think it totally goes along with this idea of being flawless and being okay about talking about that flawlessness. I think we talk about feminists as if they are all set and know everything and know how to work with people. Yeah. And I mean, and I feel like that, as Roxanne said, the world was messed up before we got here. And this is a movement that is constantly evolving. And even the organizers at the top have issues when they go home, or have family things, or have baggage, or things they work through, and this sort of expected flawlessness is what constantly gets nicked at.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so here it goes.
Go, Mona.
Backtracking to the previous question and tying it into the next question, I think something that's not discussed usually is the experience of the third world, so to speak, feminists or third world women, where feminism in the past has always been kind of part of the colonial infrastructure, so to speak. And so for a lot of people from the developing countries, so to speak, feminism is a bad word because it's part of kind of the oppressive force, so to speak, in the sense that a lot of times part of liberating certain women involves shedding or actually rejecting their culture, their tradition, their faith, everything, in order to become this perfect, evolved, liberated, form of a woman, so to speak. And so I think that's probably why it's a negative connotation for a lot of people and a lot of women. And in addition to that, just figures like Beyonce for me. I was born and raised here, and I always had that in my mind that in order to be an empowered woman, I need to bear it all. I need to be have unleashed sexual prowess, and that's all that it means to be a strong woman. That's growing up. That's just the image that I got off the media. And in order for me to be empowered, in order for me to be a strong person, that's who I have to be. Nothing more, nothing less. And those are the signals that I received. So that for me is kind of frustrating. Like at the Music Awards, Beyonce does this whole, flash dance scenario, okay, and just bearing it all, and she has to give everything, every piece of her body to her audience. And Jay-Z comes walking out fully clothed and just walking out all smug. And so for me personally, okay, I know that this is controversial, but this is for me personally, as my person, and just like Christina says, I don't represent all, everyone who I'm tokenized to represent, but for me personally, I just don't feel like that's equal. I don't feel like that's fair. Why does she have to give everything? Why does she have to show her whole, arsenal? and why doesn't he? Okay, fine, that's fine. If she does that, then I want him to come out and do that too. I'm sorry.
No.
So why do men not have to do that? Do you know what I'm trying to say? Why do we have to be out on the plate, but men don't? So for me, that's an issue for me. Why is a strong woman always have to be equivalent to this particular person?
I will say I would dress like that for the money she makes.
There you go.
For half the money she makes.
And that's how we make money. And that's how we attain value in our society. Mm-hmm. The only way to attain full value, full power, and attain the money is to do that. Do you understand? So it's just my. Sorry.
It's a good example of one particular type of entertainment, because there are other female entertainers that are just as good and just as popular that don't do that. Like Adele is a perfect example. But then there's also the sense of what I like about, and I don't want to monopolize the conversation, which is Beyonce and Jay-Z, obviously, but what I like about them is that they're a couple, and even if we're talking about a heterosexual couple, they're making it okay for a man and wife to love each other on stage in front of the world and to have a family. And that's not something that we see in like hip hop or music in general. And I think that in itself is incredibly empowering. And when we took the test and I was what was it again? The sex positive feminist, right?
Kitty.
See, and there we go, putting labels on each other, right? So the idea is that she is a sexually empowered woman, and she is totally okay with that. And there are women that are looking at that and saying, it is okay for me to like sex, and it is okay for me to feel sexy, and I'm going to own it. And so there are different variations of that, but that's just one example of an artist that's using that platform, I think, in a positive way. And we could talk about the campaign that she's currently on. I know that maybe that's something of conversation that we...
That's called a beautiful segue. Thank you, Wendy.
You're very welcome.
You can tell that she works in radio. Let's take a little look at a clip from the Being Bossy campaign.
Join us to Ban Bossy. I'm not bossy. I'm the boss.
She the boss. and you notice that the different names that were included in that, Condoleezza Rice, Sheryl Sandberg, Beyonce, a real kind of diversity of women. But one of the things that we have discussed, and as you kind of do further reading around this, is that even though there is a central word, feminist, and there's a central kind of this is feminism, what is the central purpose of feminism now? During the first wave of feminism, it was about, trying to secure voting rights. Then it's been about trying to secure some kind of equality, be it in the workplace. But a lot of the concern now is that feminism perhaps has lost its way. There isn't necessarily a central theme behind which women of whatever colour or class or creed can actually get behind. So what kind of issues does that cause for feminism?
I actually don't think it's lost its way at all. It's finally become as inclusive as it should have been the entire time.
But what's the central thrust and push now, would you say?
Well, I don't think there is a central thrust in the sense that we are inclusive of so many issues. I think some of the ones that have been outlined, discussed earlier, are, just sort of illuminate how diverse the issue has become, and rightfully so. I think for so long, the reason we could pinpoint a singular issue was because there was a particular group who was identified as feminist while others got left behind and were completely marginalized. And I think we're finally getting to that inclusive definition of feminism that we should have been all along. And as you become more inclusive, you have to address the other issues, the intersections of the other oppressions that surface in that conversation. So it's not that we've lost our way at all. I think we're growing a coalition, and we're understanding that equal means equal. It doesn't mean equality for some, and some take that step forward on this particular issue. We have to link arms and move forward together.
I would also say that no political group, no movement has ever had a singular aim. And to suggest that again, it's this idea that feminism has to somehow do something that no one else has managed to do throughout history.
But we're women, so we can do anything, right?
Well, this is true. This is true. But I absolutely agree with what Lindsey said. I definitely think that it's because we are now finally recognizing that we need to be thinking about transgender feminism and queer feminism and poverty and immigration. And so we have multiple aims. If there's a singular focus, it's that we're going to take care of all women.
Does that become problematic, though, when you're trying to spread yourself so thinly, fighting on all of these fronts, that it's almost like a divide and conquer, that there isn't a central thrust of anything? So someone's going over here and dealing with feminism and immigration, someone else is over here dealing with feminism and race, someone else is over here dealing with feminism and LGBT. Like, does that not just diffuse it to the point that not that people aren't doing anything, but the effort isn't concentrated?
But it's the effort to support women doing the work in these various different fields. It's about, if you're a woman that's working for a labor organization, empowering other women, then that's your role and that's what you enjoy doing, and I'm going to support and empower you and be of assistance in any way that I can. As somebody that does journalism, then I want to cover that story through that perspective. If you're working as an attorney in civil rights, or if you're a doctor, if you're in whatever field, if you happen to be a woman or a man that's empowering other women, then you're a feminist. And that's really where it lies. It's not, I don't think, diluting anything. It's actually, I think, more empowering to whatever field that men and women are working in.
I think it's about everybody working on their part to deliver the message, so to speak, and there's no there's not one point in time where all the feminists of the world all have to meet and have a conference, and it's just, like Wendy said, everybody does what they can. Whether we were talking earlier, if you're raising your son to be respectful towards women and not, be rigid in gender constructs and say, oh, I don't cook, just things like that. That's basically performing feminism, which is basically the quest to balance things out, and again, improve the human condition of girls and women who tend to be, oppressed because of what they're born into, and that's just everybody has different levels of oppression. So that's just one forefront, just like, Wendy was saying. I think a lot of us work on different fronts, so to speak. So I don't think that, it should be just one central focus. It just should be what everybody can do.
I would also say that it's not only about the splintered effort. I mean, it's not that we only work on our pet projects and the things that we care about. I think we're seeing a feminism where we are supporting the causes of others and taking those causes on for ourselves as well. Because, we can't do everything and we can't be everything to everyone, but I don't think it's this as fractured as the question makes it seem, where everyone sort of is doing one thing and nothing unified is happening. I think there's more unity developing right now than before, where people are saying, okay, I'm Black and queer, and I'm still going to worry about X, Y, and Z beyond my own interests. It's like feminism is, we're finally, I think, starting to just look beyond ourselves and beyond what we need, because that's what the problem was with feminism for too long. And so as we're getting better, and we have a lot to do to get better, but so does humanity. So I'm not gonna worry about it.
Yeah,
we're gonna be okay.
And presumably inclusion is bringing more people to the table, so we actually have more people doing the work. It's not more issues for a small number of people, it's more work being done by more people because the issue has actually included the thing that they care about. I'm a global coordinator with the 1 Billion Rising movement, and I'm really, thank you. I'm really lucky to work with women all over the world on that issue, and ending violence is a core issue that's important to me. But this year we were able to take that issue and talk about 1 Billion Rising for Justice and what justice looks like in different communities. And so while I was able to work on an issue that I have some experience working on, I was also able to be educated on environmental justice and what a true justice system looks like, and issues that are going on in prisons right here in Los Angeles County. So I think as we broaden our conversations and we include more people, not only will we bring more people to the table, but we'll also become more aware of the things that are affecting women around us and how we can open up the conversation to learn more ourselves and be more educated about the ways that perhaps the way we see feminism actually is hurting other women.
And that does raise a point about how feminists speak about other feminists, because I think we wouldn't be truthful if we were sitting up here saying that all feminists get along and it's like all together kumbaya. That's not happening. And I know that all of you in some way, shape or form have been called out for not necessarily being feminist enough. I mean, Roxanne, your book coming out is called Bad Feminist.
Yes. This is wow.
You chose the title.
I did. There has been a lot of discussion, particularly online in the past several months, about community and feminism, and there has been a lot of so-called calling out. And it can be frustrating because sometimes I think that you're called out on things that are perceived rather than are, and that is difficult. But I also think it's healthy that we are in a place where we can say, I disagree with this thing that you have done, or I don't think that you have lived up to your potential in this way. And so I'm of a mixed mind of it. There was an article in The Nation recently that was quite controversial about Twitter wars and feminist Twitter wars, and the words toxic and war. I mean, war is war. Twitter is not war. And
war in 140 characters or less.
Correct. It's absurd. But there were some interesting points made in the article that spoke to this idea of call-out culture. And it is difficult to be called out, but sometimes I think we need to be called out, and we need to be held to a higher standard. And at the same time, I always just say, look, I'm a bad feminist, and you need to take out the trash, dude, and you need to fix my car, and then I will cook you something. And I'm still a feminist. So I think it's okay to, I know who I am, and I know what my feminism is about, and I know my feminism is not perfect. And I don't need to prove myself to anyone. And so while this calling out is going on, and it happens, I listen to the valid criticisms, but I know who I am and what I'm about, and I sort of hold on to that.
I think it's interesting to say that you're a bad feminist because you want a guy to like fix your car, and you're gonna in return make him a sandwich or whatever. Like, when did that become being a bad feminist? Because I don't see that as being a bad feminist. I
Neither
just see
do
that
I.
as like, trade. Being practical. I know how to make a really good sandwich. You could fix the muffler. So that has
Everybody's
nothing to
happy.
do with being a good or bad feminist. Like, being in the kitchen and making something doesn't make you a bad feminist.
No, but I think that speaks to the myths of feminism that we faced. And
Right.
one of the things that I write about in the book is that I internalized a lot of the myths for so long that I got to the point where I thought enjoying sex and liking men and not wanting to do anything with the trash or the lawn made me a bad feminist. And I think we can't deny that these misperceptions exist. As much as I agree, like, when did that become the standard of like bad feminism? Come on.
Right.
We can do, I mean, there are way worse feminists than that. Let me tell you their names.
There will be no naming and shaming.
Speaking of bad feminism, maybe another word of saying feminist means liberated woman. So for me, I always feel like, I mean, if anyone's going to call anyone a bad feminist, it's me. I'll just say what's on everybody's minds, I'm sure, is that just the fact that I choose to be a Muslim, the fact that I choose to actually cover my hair, is like, good God, why would you do that? Why would you choose, first of all, to prescribe to a patriarchal religion? And why would you choose to, gosh, that's the most misogynistic religion on earth. Why would you, how could you be a liberated woman and choose, to be that, And so I think, first of all, that I think would probably be, I'm always on guard. I'm always knowing that I walk the streets knowing that's what's on people's minds, and I do go through this constant having to prove myself, and I don't feel like I need to prove myself. I'm like, whatever, it is what it is, I know who I am. I know how many layers there are to me. And I know that what I believe isn't what people perceive to be my belief system. And so that kind of also ties back to what I think the conversation should be talked about what we could do to unify. I think that's unification for me is always on the forefront of my mind as far as feminism is considered. And being inclusive, yes, and being unified in the sense that, I led a 60-woman theater performance in college. We did it several years, and we got to 60 women, and I produced it. And one of the songs that one of the women came up with was "Who Will Speak If We Don't?" And so who will speak so their voices will be heard, and basically talking about speaking for all the impoverished women in the world. And I'm like, wait a minute, I do not want that song to be as part of our production, because we need to empower them to speak. We don't have to speak for them, The work that we have to do is empower them to speak and empower them to make change within their culture, within their tradition, not having to, you guys need to shed all of that stuff and come up on our stage, and be where we are at. We are come on, I mean, it's like, you have to be, who we are in order to be truly liberated. So for me personally, Islam as it is, or as it truly is, already is a feminist religion. It gives multiple rights to women way before feminism came about, but what it has evolved into being enacted as isn't what it's supposed to be. So for me, what I would like to see done is when we talk about FGM, when female genital mutilation, when we talk about honor killings, when we talk about all these things, it's not like, that tradition does that or that religion does that. It's more like, how can we work to educate within your faith, within your and this goes for all different groups, within your community. The Latino, Chicano, have the history of like the machismo, How can we work within our roots and our tradition and our faith to educate and try to take out the undertones that give rise to these things that are not essentially what it is that we love about our background,
Lindsey, you grew up in a conservative area, you know, you said your mum did not necessarily, she didn't identify as a feminist, kind of anything, but what role, and Mona's kind of touched on it here, you know, you are a practicing Catholic. What role or what difficulties do you have kind of existing at that intersection of faith and feminism?
It's always an interesting question. Much to the chagrin of a lot of my feminist friends, I continue to be a practicing Catholic. But I look at it, I compare it in this way. When President Bush got elected the second time, I didn't leave the country just because I didn't want him to be my leader, and I didn't like the people who were in power, and I didn't like the decisions that were being made in my name as an American. I stayed in the country and fought as an American to represent the views and values that are most important to me and what I believe Americanism is. In the same way, my Catholic faith is mine, and there are other people who act in the in the name of the Catholic Church in ways that I couldn't disagree more with. But I can't. I'm not responsible for their actions. I'm responsible for my own and what I can do in response to their actions. And the longer I stay in the church and the more active I am involved in my church, the more I'm able to actually make a difference. And so, and in fact, a lot of my activism and my decision to be involved in my community and take action, and truly my commitment to social justice, comes from my faith. I was, being raised Catholic, I loved this man, Jesus, who did a lot of amazing things for people and wanted to be like him. And that really resonates with me to this day. And just because there are things that are done in the Catholic Church, which again, I break my heart. And there have been plenty of times I've called my pastor and said, okay, this is the final straw. I can't do it. I can't stay anymore. And he's like, okay, let's talk about it. And if you really want to leave, that's a decision you need to make. But remember, this is your church too, and you get to be Catholic if that's what you want to be. And I do. I believe that, and I'm really grateful that we now have a pope who is coming closer to representing things that actually look like my views and values. As an institution, we're not even anywhere close to what I believe as a person. But there. In any facet of society, there's much work to be done. That doesn't make it any less challenging to talk about going to church or being part of an institution that doesn't allow women in the leadership, and decision-making positions. But that as long as we stay and fight and advocate for change, that chance still exists. If we all leave, it doesn't.
And what about on the flip side, though? What do people within your church say about you being a feminist?
Well, actually, my church is amazing. Blessed Sacrament in Hollywood is just about the best Catholic church there is. They hosted an ecumenical service for 1 Billion Rising, and we brought together many faiths to have a spiritual experience of healing and validation and sacred, safe space for women who had experienced violence. And interestingly, I spoke on a panel once, and I was identified at the time I was teaching confirmation at my church. I was identified as a catechist, and I had this woman run up to me afterwards. It was a feminist panel. I was also the president of my local Now chapter, so that just blew people's minds. And she came up and said, does your pastor know what you're talking about today? And I said, I don't know if he does, but it's nothing I've kept a secret. And she said, does he know that you're the president of the local Now chapter? I said, yes. And she said, does the archdiocese know what you're doing? And I said, I have absolutely no idea. And I said, but if you want to know what I teach in my classroom when I teach my students about the Catholic faith, you're welcome. You're more than welcome to come and see what I teach. And later on, she actually did go to my church and try to call me out to my pastor and to the people who are part of my church. And I'm lucky to say that there are many people in my church who stand with me and understand and support and share my views and values. I'm not this singular anomaly, freak, feminist Catholic. There are lots of us who exist, and we work together because we want to see change in our church as much as anyone who doesn't identify as a Catholic feminist.
I'm also a recovering Catholic, I guess. So I'm a Catholic. I have an affinity toward the Virgin Mary, but I'm constantly questioning as to why do nuns marry Jesus, and why can't, because they literally wear a ring and they marry Jesus. And why can't they give mass, and why can't priests get married? Because that's nowhere in the Bible, and we all know that it was, it all had to do with land. But with that said, Sandra Cisneros wrote this really great piece called Guadalupe Sex Goddess. And I read it when I was in undergrad. And she is comparing her vajayjay to the Virgin. So this may not be, just a heads up, Elaine, it may not be suitable for radio later on. But I want to read a little.
Swear.
I want to read a little bit about what she wrote when she started to see the sexuality between the Virgin Mary, because there's this whole thing that we do, the virgin whore complex, right, that men have with women, and the Virgin Mary was a mother, and she was married, and she probably had more kids, and there's a whole other conversation that we could get into that. But she wrote about the Virgen. She wrote, I want to lift up her dress as I did my dolls, and look to see if she comes with chonis, underwear. And does her panocha, vajayjay, look like mine? And does she have dark nipples too? And when I read that about the Virgin Mary, I was like, oh my God, like, what is this lady talking about? And that's when I finally also saw the Virgin as a woman. And I stopped, and I went to the church, and I saw her statue, and I saw that she didn't have breasts. And that's really interesting when you go inside a Catholic church and you look at the statue of the Virgin. You're going to notice that, because I've done research. I've gone to several churches, and I've seen that, and I thought, wow, we've totally desexualized the fact that she was a woman. And I shared this with my mother and my grandmother, and they were like, ay, Dios mío, no. And they were like, praying. But I thought that it was just like, wow, it's totally liberating to see my faith written like this, and to see a woman that I actually, like a virgin that I pray to, be an actual female. So that's, when we're talking about faith and this constant conversation about where we stand within the Catholic tradition, it's like, am I really a Catholic, or am I a Catholic because I was raised a Catholic? And what do I do to change a religion that I belong to?
Yeah, Mary in our faith is a very strong female feminist figure. Her mother was under the impression that she was going to get a boy, and she said, "Oh Lord, when you give me my son, I give my oath and my promise that I'm going to, send him to the monastery, and he's going to be one of the most righteous, scholars of all time." And then she delivered a female, and she said, "You know what? I'm going to keep my promise." And she took Mary. I named my daughter Maryam, which is Arabic for Mary, and she took her daughter to the monastery, and she was under the care of Zechariah, and she was she studied and worshipped amongst the monks, and she was a powerful, very strong figure. She was a really strong connection with God. She had her own miracles, and just the fact that she got in is a pretty cool thing. So for me, she's just an awesome figure. So yeah, just as far as Mary and just the strong women, and that being tied into our faith.
Faith is often kind of tied in with, in this context at least, kind of political affiliation, and quite often feminism is tied in with kind of being politically progressive. But of course there are women who would lean or identify conservative who are also feminist. And another little piece of pop culture for you. You may remember there was a keynote speech that Sarah Palin gave back in 2010. It was to the Sarah B. Anthony List breakfast. And this was her talking about feminism. She says, "I'd like to remind people of another feminist tradition, kind of a Western feminism. It's influenced by the pioneering spirit of our foremothers who went in a wagon, trains across the wilderness, and they settled in homesteads. And these were tough, independent, pioneering mothers whose work was as valuable as any man's on the frontier. And it's no surprise that our Western states that gave women the vote, the right to vote, way before their East Coast sisters in a more genteel city perhaps, got it right." And then she kind of goes on all the way. Actually, no, there's another bit here that I wanted to read where she says, that's it. I'd like to thank the SBA list too for being a home to a new conservative feminist movement, and that's how I look at it. It's an emerging conservative feminist identity. Far too long, when people heard the word feminist, they thought of the faculty lounge at some East Coast women's college, right? And no offense to them, they have their opinions and they have their voice, and God bless them, they're just right. But that's not the only voice of women in America. We touched on it a little bit earlier on about calling each other out. Is feminism in danger of setting aside women who may identify as conservative? Are they not welcome to the party?
No response from anyone.
For radio, crickets.
There's definitely a culture of this calling out, and I think the danger is not. I mean, I wasn't familiar with that. Maybe because whenever I see her name, I'm looking for other stupid things that she says. But that was actually kind of amazing, right? That she's taking on that banner, and there is this risk that just because we're in a tweet culture right now, that we're not having conversations anymore. I mean, I know I love having the last word, and I'm totally guilty of that, of getting in fights over God knows what on Facebook because I'm not employed, but.
You're flexibly employed.
I'm flexibly employed, but
contract.
But I think that maybe is the bigger danger. Is that because of what we think of these labels, that we're not really taking time to, and there aren't forums really. Like Facebook it has its limits, right? Twitter has its limits, but we're not having moments to actually reach across and actually stop and not knee jerk.
And that's why we have forums like this, Roxanne.
I think that's a tough question. I think the political answer is that there's totally room within the movement. But my honest answer is that if you believe that the female body should be legislated, then no, you don't get to come to my clubhouse. But I do believe conservative feminists exist. I too am Catholic, and my parents are deeply faithful, and I respect that. And I still think my mother's a feminist. And so it's a difficult, there's not like one universal answer. Like in my heart, I think, hell no. But then I look at my mother and I think, it's not as black and white. It's not an easy answer. And this speaks to Twitter, Facebook, that we want easy answers, but there are no easy answers about conservatism, faith, and feminism. That it sometimes is a multivariate response.
I had interestingly enough, I posted on my Facebook that I was coming here so that I could invite friends, and I said, do you consider yourself feminist? And I have a very conservative white girlfriend who I met in college, of course, like where else would I have met her? And we've gone back and forth on a lot of issues. And she posted a comment on my Facebook that, we were going back and forth, and she said, I don't believe in feminism because I don't believe in like neo-Nazi women saying that because I stay at home with my kids, I'm not, that is, what did she say, that women who stay at home, she quoted something and she said, women who stay at home is the equivalent of rape. And I could pull it up on my Facebook as to this particular feminist who said this. And so she said, I completely disagree with that. And so we were going back and forth, and I said, I too completely disagree with that. And I am in no way a conservative feminist. But if you support women, and if you support the empowerment of women, and if you support the idea that you are an empowered woman if you want to stay at home, and you also are an empowered woman if you support other women who want to go to work and climb the corporate ladder, but also have nannies at home, and you want to legitimize the work that they're doing as well, that's also empowerment. And if you agree that all these things are good, then you are a feminist. And she, after a while, she said, I 100% agree with you, Wendy. And I was like, wow, like that's awesome. Like this conservative white woman living in like Wyoming or someplace like in the middle of the country, just says she completely 100% agrees with me. And I think that is the idea of bringing people into the movement, is that we can come from a variety of different viewpoints, but at the very core, like feminism, at least to me, is about empowering women. And we do disagree on issues of, legislation against the, bodies of women, but at least at the very essence, there's that.
I think it goes back to sisterhood. As had some questions we had to answer prior, and growing up, I always hated girls because they're so competitive, they're so catty, they were backstabbing and superficial, and it's unfortunate that a lot of girls and women feel that way, and it's unfortunate that so many times women tend to tear each other down and to judge and to try to rise above each other and compete. And so I think kind of what's echoing in feminism is sisterhood. You know, how can we ultimately achieve sisterhood in the sense that we're listening to each other, we're listening to each other's narratives, we're listening to each other's opinions, and okay, although your opinion differs from mine, I'm sure we can see eye to eye on other things. And overall, we have this sisterhood of understanding that, you know, again, women should be treated, you know, just as men should be treated. They should be respected equally. You know, if we still have issues in the workplace. We still have, you know, issues as far as who's in charge of housework and staying at home with the kids. I for one, for sure, I know I'm you know, if I mention that I'm a mother, and God, if I mention how many kids I have, you know, automatically I'm at risk of just being looked on as not a strong woman, you know. So I have to say, oh, but you know, I work on the side and I contract myself. I do, you know, I do. But it's just that pressure that, you know, in order to be a strong woman, what do you have to be in order to be able to claim that label? You know, you have to work, and then, you know, and if you know, have the children, you know, you still have to work as well in order to claim that title. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, totally.
Just because my mom doesn't identify as a feminist doesn't mean that she doesn't exhibit a lot of strong qualities that I've you know, taken on myself. And, you know, to your question about the, you know, more conservative women, or women who hold more conservative beliefs being part of the movement, look, if there are women who are interested in passing the Equal Rights Amendment, I'm not going to check your party registration. If there are women who are interested in establishing pay equity in this country, I'm not going to check your party registration. If you're going to be with me in this movement, I really don't care where you are politically on paper. I care what actions you're putting forth. And there are going to be some women who disagree. You know, there are plenty of places where people can disagree, but that doesn't make us just as we are opening up the movement to be more inclusive, we also, you know, we start to include women who also will share very different perspectives from one another. As long as, you know, the kind of person I would say is not a feminist or not part of the feminist movement is someone who is not working towards equality. And if that's your end game, is to have some people more privileged and other people, you know, purposefully held back, then that's not a feminist. And so that would be a person who's not part of the movement for me. But that isn't determined exclusively by a party designation.
Mona used the term sisterhood, and that's, you know, would include all the women in here, but can men be part of that feminist sisterhood? There are a number of men who raise their hand to say, you know, yes, I'm a man and I'm here amongst all of the ladies that are here. But I'll ask, how many of the men in here would describe themselves as feminist? 3, 4, 5. So we've got like 5. So we kind of got a little, you know, maybe I'm a feminist, my wife's not here, I don't know. If you don't mind me asking, for those that put their hand up, maybe 2 of you, why would you describe yourself as feminist? I'm looking right at you, I'm sorry. No pressure.
Okay. Well, because of, I feel we're all equal. I'm looking around the room, I feel a little older than a lot of the group here. I went to college, started college in 1968. All the women I knew were feminists. I mean, the feminist movement was really getting going then. The whole idea of equality was just part of normalcy for me. And in my relationship with my wife and all the women I've ever known, there's just been an equality. You know, I have no trouble cleaning the house. I do most of the cooking.
Can I marry you?
Already taken, you know.
Just kidding.
When I met my wife, she didn't even have a vacuum cleaner. I said, "You haven't vacuumed this place for 9 months." I brought my vacuum, you know. But it's not, you know, and there is that trade-off, like you were talking earlier. Who cooks, who cleans, who can fix things. It really should have nothing to do with gender. It's who's good at what, you know, and just, you know, and I feel like there just shouldn't really be a difference. When it's feminism, it's really humanism, and it's we're all human. We're all people here, and that's you know, well, I feel part of it. I feel just, you know, sex is, well, we do think differently in so many ways, but when it comes to equality and all of that, I mean, there just shouldn't be one group that is any lesser than the other in any way at all.
Yeah, thank you. And I will just say, because I know that he is home watching, Maurice, I love you. We're still married. You're fabulous. He's home looking after the baby while I came out. He's handling business. One of the other gentlemen, you identify as feminist, which is great. What reactions have you had when you have perhaps said, well, you know, I identify as feminist, I have feminist ideals? Is anybody willing to share, like, what responses you've had, perhaps from other men when you've been quite open about your feminism, so to speak? Yep, just here.
So I work in a scientific setting right now, and like I told my friends today, okay, I'm going to this feminist forum, and we're going to talk about feminism. All of them were just they didn't know what to say. They never met a feminist before. They never actually like even met, I don't know, like anyone working for equal rights in a scientific setting. So that just like troubles me, and that's the reason I'm scared of labels, because like once I said I was a feminist, now everyone just looked at me weird and then said. Like one guy just went off and said, you know, I like equal rights, but feminism is much more than equal rights. And I was like, I don't know what you mean right here. So yeah, I'm like, so I was one of the people who had like my hands up and down and up and down. And that's the reason, like I'm really scared of labels. So I don't know if I would identify myself as a feminist ally, or just someone working who's interested in like equality. So I don't know.
No, thank you. Thank you for your thoughts. There was, I don't have it to hand, but there was someone who wrote in to the Public Insight Network saying that, yes, men can be feminist, but they have a very separate role, that a man can be a feminist, but he can't necessarily do the work on the front line, that he should be more in the background as the supporter, you know, kind of cooking and doing the vacuuming if you haven't done it for 9 months, and, you know, looking after the baby or whatever. I'm just interested in all of your thoughts on, you know, that kind of sex and feminism, man and feminist.
I think male feminists can exist and should exist, and I think it's about being informed about what does that mean and the ever-evolving conversation around it, and that it's not just like I'm a feminist, I'm off the hook, but it's constantly being in this forever conversation that is about what these things mean. I mean, just like for me, it's like this equivalent of when someone says, "Well, I'm not racist. Here's a list of all my black friends," and
Don't say that.
you know, that's not good, right? It's not good to have people on a list and to read that list. And so I feel like it's about, well, what does that mean, and how to be an ally, and constantly understanding where the issues are evolving, and how to be supportive, and just really getting under the issue more than just simplifying it as, and it is as simple as, yes, we are all human, but there are so many intersections of so many issues of people of color and labor and education and things like that, and these are things that make this such a complicated conversation.
And Lindsey, you said during this conversation that it's really about, it's not even about the labels, it is actually about doing the work. So what kind of work would you like to see a man take on in order to be able to move the feminist cause forward?
Well, I think our current mayor in Los Angeles, Mayor Eric Garcetti, is an excellent example of a feminist, and he's probably more feminist than some women I know. And what he does and what men who are feminists like him do is really listen, engage, and empower women. So he's actually, in his leadership, for example, he's brought in more women into appointed office since he's taken office. And I think that's, giving women leadership opportunities, giving women a voice, creating space for women to have a voice wherever that is, I think is really important. I'm kind of conflicted on the topic of men in the context of feminism. On the one hand, I think men, like was indicated back here, men who identify as feminists struggle with saying it publicly, and I want to be a person who helps you be more strong about that, because we need more men who are willing to say that boldly and proudly, and I want everyone to say that they're a feminist boldly and proudly. But talking about why you believe in equality is really important. But on the flip side, I'm not terribly inclined to put men on a pedestal who come to an event like tonight, because I think all men should be here. It shouldn't be a room full of women. And quite frankly, in a lot of cases, the oppression that women experience, it's not our fault. We're not holding ourselves back. So, I think the people who need to be part of this conversation, and in some cases educated, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way, are men who really need to benefit from the kinds of things that we're talking about. So, I'm kind of conflicted when it comes to that topic.
I think men are critically important to feminism, and I don't think that they need to sort of take a back seat and let the women lead. I think that's hypocritical. I think they need to be walking alongside us. But I think the best way that men can contribute to feminism right now, so I am a writer, and a lot of what I write about is gender inequality in publishing. And so what I would love to see is some male feminists say, I'm not going to write for the New York Review of Books or the London Review of Books or the New Yorker until they get their mastheads under control. I think that they have to start taking stands because they're in a position to create the change. In some of these deeply embedded institutions where sexism just runs rampant. And we see it even recently with all of the hirings that we've seen for a lot of the new companies. Nate Silver went to ESPN with his 538, and Ezra Klein is doing his own thing, and the eBay guy is doing his own thing. And one of the things that you can notice, these are new media companies. They have no excuse, and they also have very few women or people of color. And so what can they do? They can't call themselves feminists and still contribute and start organizations like that. And so I think we have to start to hold their feet to the fire and say, you need to put your money where your mouth is.
I think you can draw parallels to the civil rights movement, the beginnings of the civil rights movement here in the U.S. Basically, a lot of when finally, African Americans came, there's different tiers to the civil rights movement, of course, but when they first came to start to unify and say, we're going to own this, we're going to raise ourselves up ourselves. We don't need anyone else to do it. And then there were a lot of whites who felt like, oh, I wanna do it too. Some felt, you know what, I want to do this on my own. I don't want you to come into the play because I think too many things will surface. So that's one thing that I hear, I've read and heard traditionally in feminist debates of whether or not men should be involved or not, the whole oppression, oppressor, oppressed thing. But on a human level, I just exactly like all of you were saying, that men have to be, that women's issues are not women's issues are men's issues. Even as far as, the whole sister, daughter, mother, grandmother, aunt, niece thing, everything that affects women affects you eventually. And again, all the women's issues are men's issues. So they should be at the forefront. They should be doing everything. And they have to be, again, drawing the parallel again. It was said, if you, as a white person or Caucasian, want to be part of this struggle, then you have to stand up. You have to actually look inside of yourself and identify all of your, racist tendencies or constructs. And then on top of that, you need to go out there and stand up whenever someone says anything that's racist, you need to be able to stand up and verbalize it. You need to actually make space. You need to actually make strides. It's not just enough to say, I believe in it. You actually have to, put your money where your mouth is, so to speak.
Do the work.
So.
I want to play another clip before we get into a further discussion about the intersection of race and feminism. There was a wonderful TED talk in my hometown of London, in Euston, with the Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and she says that all of us should be feminists.
I am a feminist. And when I looked up the word in the dictionary that day, this is what it said. Feminist, a person who believes in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. My great-grandmother, from the stories I've heard, was a feminist. She ran away from the house of the man she did not want to marry and ended up marrying the man of her choice. She refused, she protested, she spoke up whenever she felt she was being deprived of access, of land, that sort of thing. My great-grandmother did not know that word, feminist. But it doesn't mean that she wasn't one. More of us should reclaim that word. My own definition of feminist is, a feminist is a man or a woman who says, a feminist is a man or a woman who says, yes, there's a problem with gender as it is today, and we must fix it. We must do better. The best feminist I know is my brother, Kene. He's also a kind, good-looking, lovely man, and he's very masculine.
Is he single? I'll find out for you.
The point that she was making there, though, is that she is a woman, she's from Nigeria, she's African, she's a global African, she spends a lot of time here in the United States and around the world, the UK. But she says we are all feminists in some way, shape or form, or we should all aspire to be feminists. With Chimamanda, though, you look at me, she's gorgeous, looks fabulous, great top, really want it, hair, all of that. And as feminists, we shouldn't talk about that, but it's true, she looked great. But there's also the fact, she's black. And there has been a lot done and said and dissected on this intersection of race and feminism. You had the likes of Shirley Chisholm, who said that she didn't feel like she was invited to the party of feminism, kind of back when she was running for office. You have people like Florence Kennedy, who was like, black feminism was something completely different from the traditional feminism, so to speak, or the mainstream feminism. And so, Roxanne, I'm going to start with you, as this is kind of something that you have talked about. Where do we stand now with this cross-section of race and feminism? Because even today, we still see a very stark difference. Certainly when you look online, social media, again, feminism in 140 characters, but we're still seeing a big difference in how people who would say that I'm a black feminist and people from other races, that there is still that divide, even though we would all like to kind of come together in sisterhood, as Mona would say. That's not necessarily the case when it comes to race, is it?
No, not at all, unfortunately. For me, I straddle a difficult line because I grew up in Nebraska. So I lived in Omaha, and frankly, if you don't, you're the only one. You're the only person of color. And so I didn't even connect with communities of color until college. And so when I see a lot of the divisions now, I recognize them, and I certainly recognize the history because I read. It's difficult, and I think we're seeing a new schism that's developing, particularly online. And I think on the surface, the schism is based around race, but I also think it's based around access and platform and voice. And so I do think this is something that can be fixed and bridged in ways that previous schisms could not be, because we can provide platforms, and hopefully, media companies will get it together and allow that. It's difficult, though, because I think that a lot of women of color don't see themselves represented by mainstream feminism even now. And I don't think that they're wrong in believing that. And so we just have to keep fighting the good fight, and just continuing to call out these women who act like feminism doesn't need to be inclusive. But I don't know that we're ever going to get away from this issue. I think people tend to naturally divide, and it's troubling, but we can only do so much to solve it.
And there's the other issue when we kind of talk about women of color, that often women from Asian backgrounds are kind of like, well, hang on a second, well, where do I fit?
This is where I get to speak as the representative for all
Represent
Asian
your people, Christine.
Well, I think it's interesting to in talking about, from what I have witnessed, that there is so much internalized sexism and homophobia that needs to be addressed before even going into feminism, and that sometimes there's a big stink about something racist that happened in pop culture, but that there are so many other intersecting issues that are not also addressed, if that makes sense. So we got a long way to go, but but that definitely I've had the experience of talking to some Asian American men, and they think feminism is totally evil, and they see themselves as emasculated victims of pop culture. You know, this is not a lot of people, but this is something that I have stumbled upon that I think is significant.
Wendy?
Well, 2 points that I'd like to make. Just to address really quickly the young man who works in sciences. I'm so glad that he's here, that you're here, because we need more feminists to work in sciences so that you can create a male birth control that is distributed far and wide through Planned Parenthood, so Planned Parenthood is never touched again by the government. Because once men have that, then they'll see why it's so terribly needed. You know, as far as race intersecting with feminism, Gloria Alzaldúa is a feminist writer, a Chicana feminist writer who wrote a book called This Bridge Called My Back. And she talked about the intersection of gender, culture, even indigenous populations within that. And she said, we have not melted into the pot, because we won't. We are individual in who we are. And it's important that we recognize the intersections within our own culture. And whether it's mestizo identity, whether it's Spanish mixed, whether it's various different parts of Latin America, whether it's the intersection of what it is to be Latino in the US. My sister's currently dating a guy who's Italian. My other sister was dating a guy from the Middle East, and they're Salvadorian Mexican. And so what will that mean, like, with their children? And there's all these questions that still need to be answered. But at the end of the day, it's, you know, are you a person that is rooted culturally? Are you somebody that's strong in your identity? And if the answer to that is yes, then you should be okay. And as long as, again, like, we go back to the point of, are you somebody that works towards the empowerment of women? And if the answer to that is yes, then you're on the good track, you know. And I think that's all we need to think about at some points.
I think a question that's on a lot of people's minds, not to derail, but is, what can I do? You know, in general, when I see all the injustices in the world, if I was a male and I felt like, good God, what's happening? You know, why are these things happening to these women? And as a woman, I feel this way. What could I do? You know, what could I, you know, possibly do? I just wanted to touch on that, just because I kind of still sense of an energy of frustration still there and not touched upon. And I would say, again, back to the human level, if you have children, again, not to keep reiterating, but raise them in a sense that they'll be a part of the solution and not part of the problem. In your friend circles, your friendship circles, when you hear a guy friend talking, pejoratively about a woman, or even regarding women as nothing but, you know, something to have sex with, you know, why to call them on it, you know? If when these things, I have a friend who I was talking over about Christina Wong's piece, actually. She was interviewed about the fetishization of Asian women. And then there's this statistic. You can probably talk about it. Go for it.
Oh,
No, I'll dive in what I'm trying to
there's
say.
this dating app that, and the user stats indicated that men of all races, it's totally hetero, and there are only 4 races according to this app, by the way. Black, white, Latino. Asian, that's it. And men of all races prefer Asian women, and they asked me to be a talking head to comment on it on behalf of my people, and I knew in a fraction of 4 minutes I couldn't accomplish much, so I just said, "Suck it, white ladies!" I won basically, and I blew my nose, and I'm climbing on the green screen, and I'm thrusting. I'm like, yeah, I could do whatever I want, and so that was the best way I could think of to.
So in a matter of just a few minutes, Christina was able to deconstruct the image of the Asian women that all these men supposedly lust after, which is the submissive, perfect body, quiet and demure, but
Smart,
she's exotic, and there's something else behind the curtains,
I'm basically reconstructing it here as they sit in silence looking at smart people and not knowing what to say on this panel.
My guy friend paused, and probably because he has that fetish, and so just the fact that
Where is he? Let me at him.
No, I'm just.
I want this so bad.
He's not ready for you, Christina. He's not ready.
So thinking about the fact that, when that's where I would like men to get to that point where they can be open-minded enough, and we need to do the same thing about ourselves first and foremost. But all of us need to get to the point where we can be open-minded enough to look into ourselves and start. And this is a human condition. All of us are just so ready to go ahead and look at others and, oh, you're wrong and you're horrible and you're this and you're that. But at what point do we actually look into ourselves and see, within ourselves what's wrong with what's wrong with our perceptions and what's wrong with our judgments?
Well, I'm going to pause for the cause because we have a whole audience here, and we've had a jolly old time sitting up here talking for the last hour and 45 minutes. But I'd love to open it up to the audience for questions to any of our panelists and comments as well. I mean, we have covered an awful lot in the last hour and 45 minutes. But do raise your hands if you have a question. Elaine will run over to you with the microphone, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. And we're going to go over it a little bit. If you need to leave at 9 o'clock, you're very welcome to. But we're probably going to go until about 10 after. So we'd encourage you to stay if you would like to. But we've got some hands up here.
And Haley's over there as well. Please stand and give your name, and we'll hold on to the mic. Okay. My name is Terry. Thank you for a really great panel. The reason I'm standing up is because I'd like for you to talk about a specific, which is my sister is a jazz saxophone player who's played all over the world. I'm a guitarist. We were having a conversation that at turning 50, we both were blown away that looking back, we knew we were pioneers, but we thought there'd be a lot of women following us. We don't see them. I do the website for a very large guitar organization. I'm the only woman. Where are the jazz players? Where are the saxophone players? Where are the guitarists? Why aren't women also giving those instruments to their children?
Well, I mean, I think it's a problem that goes beyond feminism. I think that the arts have been cut from public schools. I really think it's a logistical thing that when we don't teach our children about the beauty of music, they don't even have the opportunity to go into those fields. So beyond feminism, I think it's also a public school issue.
I would say, too, that it's a pop culture thing, too, that I have 3 girls, and I watch everything that they watch, and everything out there is be a rock star. Even back in my age, I remember Jem. Gosh, Jem was like my idol. Be a rock star, and which is actually guitar playing. Actually, if you think about it, there are a lot of women guitar players, but they're playing the electrical guitar. But I guess what you're trying to talk about is traditional music. Classical guitar.
There are very few women guitarists. There are very few women saxophone players today.
Yeah, of course. So I'm just saying, guys, what's pushed, I think, right now is being famous, so to speak, and fitting a certain mold and playing a certain type of music. if they do get to that point, like you're saying. But for the most part, I would say even other kinds of music isn't really pushed culturally. That's what my take.
There were some more hands over here.
Hi, my name's Sarah. Perhaps I might be in a little bit of a bubble living in Los Angeles where hot is everything. But in a state like that where bodies are objectified almost to a point that's beyond race, how do some of the ladies of size feel about feminism? How size affects perceptions of you as a feminist?
I say if you're a curvy girl, embrace being a curvy girl. And I think the Dove campaign is an excellent example of how corporations are using the various different images of women to empower women and to make us feel like it is, the Photoshop model image is slowly fading, because even more companies are using real women, and real men for that matter, to sell their products. And there was a campaign actually that used PhD women, this company that sells clothes, that used women only with a PhD to be the models in their campaigns, because they were actually going after smart, educated women. So LA is a fictional place. It is a glitz and glam. It's and that's just what it is. But it's not the reality of the rest of the world. And so don't focus solely on what LA is, and really love yourself for who you are, and know that there are companies and people that appreciate all types of women.
I would say that it's hard, and I don't think it's just LA. I think it's the world. I think the world is very sizist. I mean, look at airplane seats. The world is not designed for people who are above a certain size. And it's hard. How do you, I had panic attacks about coming to LA for the very reason that you point out. I was like, oh my God, they're gonna be like, what is this? I'm a person. Come to the Midwest, you'll see lots of people like me. Which is not a great thing per se, but I think in addition to loving yourself, I mean, I think it's okay to sort of acknowledge how hard it is to be a woman of size in this world. It's hard. And I think a lot of people are really good at putting on a good shield, but I have a good cry every now and again, and worry about sort of what are people gonna think about my body. I didn't even put my books out into the world for a long time because I thought, oh, I don't want people to see me. But then I just remembered that I have a voice, and that my voice matters even if my body doesn't fit a cultural expectation of what a body should be. My body isn't any less important than anyone else's just because it's bigger. And I think it's important to remember that, and it's exactly sort of what she said, love yourself. Though I think the Dove campaign is totally terrible and corrupt. Sorry. It's just terrible. And they never really have really fat women. I mean, come on.
They're all beautiful.
Right?
They have perfect skin. They have perfect hair.
Dove is not knocking on my door.
Maybe after watching this, Dove, if you're watching.
What up? I use your shampoo.
Let's take two at the back, and then we have a hand here at the front, and we'll come over here.
Hi, my name is Hitomi. I'm wondering what the panelists think about the all too common exclusion of trans women from feminism, and what cisgender feminist allies can do to try and remedy that.
Who'd like to take that?
I think that's a great question, and I think that trans feminism, and I think that we've failed trans women, and what we have to do is stand up and say we stand with you, and we have to stop sort of being silent on these issues. When we see, for example, the other day, some crazy person with 180 followers on Twitter was going after Parker Marie Malloy, and had outed her birth name and all sorts of craziness. And I think when we see these things happen, we have to stand up and say something, and we have to do something. And when we talk about feminism, and this is something I'm working on myself, we have to get beyond the gender binary. I think a lot of us are very trapped in it, and it's something that I struggle with, and I can admit that. I recognize that, though, and I think if more of us recognize that there is more to gender than just being cisgendered, we can do a lot to help the transgender community, but we have to forefront the transgender feminist issues as much as we forefront any other issue.
There's a wonderful TED Talk that I would encourage you to see Her name is Gina Rosero, and she is a trans model, one of the very few that are actually very outspoken. Just gave a TED Talk in New York just literally about a week or so ago, and is starting a whole movement on trans models and really that particular part of feminism, which I think you're absolutely right, it's critically missing, but we need those voices to rise up.
To answer the action part, I think the best thing that we can do is listen and learn. In my experience, which is very limited, I served on the city council in the city of West Hollywood for a couple of years, and while I was there, I was able to vote to support the creation of the first ever Transgender Advisory Board, and that board is an appointed body that exists in the city of West Hollywood to address issues of the transgender community. And I supported it because I wanted to learn more. So I think the more we can put ourselves in spaces to actually learn what those actions are. I'm certainly not in a place to speak on behalf of the transgender community of what their greatest needs are and what we can do beyond that.
I think I'm so glad you asked that question, because I was even feeling when you were addressing us ladies, I was like, oh, oh. and that there hasn't been enough mention of I didn't actually understand cisgender till last year, and I feel like I'm constantly learning. And when I first heard the term, I was like, being used about me, I was like, what does that mean? Do I have like vaginas all over my body? What does that mean? Like, I didn't know what it meant. And I feel like it's just about constant education and also be willing to pass the mic and to not run the conversation and admit I don't know. And please, could you help me understand this?
Thank you. Great question. Yes. Let's take.
Hi, I'm Genevieve, and my question is, what do you think about the online social justice in which a lot of people speak about topics that they may not know, and they speak so like emotionally that they turn people off to that subject?
I feel like that's happened more than online. That sort of emotional turn off has turned people off.
Yeah, it's a big problem. And I think one of the problems that the internet has brought us is that anyone with a Google access thinks that they're somehow magically an expert. Have you seen all the aviation experts lately? It's just amazing. Who knew? All these people knew everything about where a plane could land. Courtney Love, by the way, thought she found it. It is a problem, but I think that we have to look at why we're being turned off from these deeply emotional messages, because I think the emotion is coming from a place of catharsis and a place of deep hurt. And they need to do that before they can get to a place where there can be reasonable dialogue. And so for me, when I see it and I come up against it and I just think this is crazy. Sorry, there's a child and I didn't realize. But when I come up against these kinds of things, I have to look at why am I reacting negatively to this, because maybe it's more about me than what they're saying, and maybe it's something in me. But also, I think that some people only know how to respond emotionally, and unfortunately, that sort of, after a while, it just speaks for itself if there's no intellectual rigor there. And it is frustrating, and frankly, I get as frustrated as anyone.
Yeah, I think the takedown culture, which is how I refer to it, is just really destructive. And I'm not a feminist because I can tell you you're not a feminist because you're bad for X, Y, and Z reasons. And I get really frustrated when people define their feminism by being able to tell other people why they're not a feminist. That just doesn't work for me. But I also think internet culture creates the opportunity to have different kinds of conversations with people you might not, who aren't in your immediate vicinity, and I think that can help broaden your education and understanding and access to talking with people who have different experiences than you. So I think while we're more present to some of those conversations and conflicts, I think it's also the opportunity for the solution by being able to connect diverse communities in authentic engagement.
One form of activism that when I actually have time, partake in is post-board activism, where if there's an issue that you're reading about and there's those comments, and it's always the most negative people who are willing to go ahead and put the commentary that that's something you can do, is go in and put your 2 cents. Take the time. It does take time to actually, and sometimes you feel like it's a lost cause, but I don't know how related this is, but to go in there, and again, there's the negatives and positives of everything, to be able to reach out to people who you probably wouldn't even lend you an ear, and to try to, make them think about things in a different light.
Let's take another question here at the front.
Hello, my name is Susan, and I want to thank you all for coming tonight. You've all been incredibly impressive. I want to say that I am a feminist. I've always been a feminist. The one thing that I feel that I can do every day is decide where to spend my money. And my husband agrees with me on this. All our professionals that we see, attorney, accountant, financial advisor, every doctor we go to, everyone we use, are female. Because if we don't support women, how are women going to get more ahead? I look for women-owned businesses, women-owned companies, companies that support women and people of color and do right by their employees. I look for well-run businesses, and when I hear that there's a business that's not like that, I don't give them my money. I want to say that I'm not doing anything near as impressive as any of you, but this is my one small way of making a difference in the world. And Mona, you mentioned being part of a sisterhood. I feel that I am part of the sisterhood of all women in the world. Whether they think they're feminists or not, they just don't know it yet. And men too. They just don't know, but they all had mothers. Most of them had sisters or wives or daughters, and they'll know at some point. They'll know at some point when their mother or daughter or sister needs to know about Lindsey's, tell me the name of the billion.
Oh, 1 billion rising?
1 billion, yes. That's
I
so
love talking about 1
important.
billion rising, so.
You haven't mentioned that enough, but that's so important. All of you look that up. Anyway, that's just my take on this, and I just wanted to thank you all.
Thank you. I would say you're doing beyond more than what we're doing. You're giving financial support and to women, and that's something that's not something I do all the time too. I really don't feel like I'm as accomplished as I'd like to be, but at least I do that. Any project that I do, I go out and I seek women to do the job. Anytime not because, again, sorry you guys, but it's just that they don't get enough, support. And a lot of times nowadays, again, probably back in the day, it was, men who needed, the support financially because they were supporting families. Right now it's women who are raising the families. The amount of single mothers out there is astounding. So women need to be financially supported. They need to be uplifted. And again, I really, truly believe that the majority of problems that women face is a roundabout result of poverty. And I think financial support is the most important thing that we could do. Financially supporting groups that are doing good work, financially supporting artists who are doing good work and who are actually speaking out, financially supporting women who don't use who will challenge the weight norms, so to speak. It's horrible. I don't believe that our problems are solved in any way in pop culture whatsoever. I don't care who says that they're trying to level the playing field and use plus-size models. The plus-size models are not even anywhere near what normal size is. My daughter is constantly, no matter how much I uplift her, she is still down because her color is brown and because she's overweight. No matter what I say to her, nothing will change how she feels because she looks around her at pop culture, she looks around her at school, and she can't accomplish that perfect, image. So no, we're nowhere near accomplishing that.
I I wanted to jump on that in terms of putting your money in, and I work with the microloan organization in Uganda last year and learned tremendously how much that it changed the way I thought about charity. And the role of women all over the world, and especially this organization I work with, Volunteer Action Network, gives loans specifically to women affected by war in northern Uganda, and there's a lot of pushback from men are like, well, why don't we get loans? That's not right. And it's because women eat less. They know they're the ones who are raising the family most of the time, and this organization actually has to bring men in when the loans are made and explain to them this is not about taking power away from you. This is not about of them running drunk with power. This is about them being able to provide better for the family and for themselves and for their own self-esteem. And so it was just an amazing way for me to understand how women are connected all over the world. And I just mentioned that because you talked about money, you didn't talk about charity, and I would encourage anyone to think about that as a way of giving, not just scooping food at the soup kitchen on Thanksgiving, which I think doesn't really do much. But treating people in a partnership.
I want to take a couple of more questions if we can. Someone's okay.
Hello. I was very intrigued by the title of this discussion as it was advertised, which was it not your mother's feminism? Right. Because that's what really brought me here, is how do we challenge these more conventional ideas about what feminism actually means and what it is and how it impacts people. I myself, as a feminist, feel very trapped by that label, as a lot of people here, I feel have communicated tonight. And so to me, I think we do have to address things like women's portrayal in the media, women's issues, conventionally body issues. We can use strategies like where we choose to spend our money, but how do we actually change the narrative about feminism? How do we physically and aggressively confront the systems of historical oppression that have created this need for feminism to begin with, and talk about that while not isolating people either and bringing them along with us? That's what I struggle to thinking about all the time, and I certainly don't have an answer. It's a big question.
It's a huge question. Brief answers if we can, please.
For
so
me,
we can get another couple
that things like sexism and racism and are such big systems. The only way, it's not railing against the system, it's impersonating the system. It's taking over the system. It's coming in like a Trojan horse. And Mona was talking about the interview I did, where it's just like I was supposed to be a talking head, but I took over. My first project was a fake mail-order bride website that people looking for pornography found, or mail-order brides found, and they found all these fake mail-order brides who were screaming at them. So that's the way I know, is using the existing systems and impersonating it.
I don't think we need to change the narrative about feminism. I think we need to change how people read the narrative. I don't think we're the problem. And I totally understand why people feel constrained by the label, but I find the label freeing. And I have not always felt that way, so it definitely took some time to get here. But I don't think feminism or how feminism is perceived is the problem. It really is, as the questioner asked, it's about the institutions. And so how do we dismantle the institutions? And it's absolutely Trojan horse. We do it from the inside.
We're going to take one more question, because, of course, we could sit here all night. I'm going to let the ladies at the back choose. So let's take this lady here. In the middle? You had your hand up? Oh, okay, we'll take the gentleman there then. Oh.
We have been talking about taking action and changing the world. And last night I had dinner with a lawyer friend who happened to be inside the Supreme Court hearing the case yesterday about religious liberty, supposed religious liberty.
The Hobby Lobby case.
Yes, the Hobby Lobby case. And my friend said, and what I think also is, we may lose that case. There's a very good likelihood that the Supreme Court will not vote the feminist way, but the opposite. And I guess I don't understand why the women's movement isn't rallying around the issue of reproductive freedom, because in my 50 years of activism, the single most empowering thing I've seen is the birth control pill, the ability for women to decide when we want children, when we don't. And to me, what's going on in this country, in the red states particularly, is they want to reverse Roe v. Wade and take away women's right to plan their families. And I guess I'm asking the panel, isn't this somewhere where the women's movement should be actively engaged in not letting this happen?
The women's movement is actively engaged in this, absolutely. North Carolina, Texas, Ohio, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota. And I would say Texas right now is really leading the way. What those women in Texas did when they stood at the courthouse and when Wendy Davis filibustered, women, we are very much on top of this issue. And Roe v. Wade, they're trying to overturn it, but whatever. They can keep trying, and they may do it, but we will not stop having control over our bodies.
And the issue is also the talking heads that we see in media that are pushing to remove Roe v. Wade. It's not the general consensus of the American public. That's just what we see versus what's actually happening on the ground. My face was inundated. My Facebook page, not my face. My Facebook page was inundated with all these contacts and friends that I have that work for Planned Parenthood that were at the courthouse, that were right outside, they were rallying. There were hundreds of women there, but we don't see that in the media. CNN's not covering because they're totally obsessed with the Malaysia airline and finding the plane. But and that's really sadly the sad state of media that we have now, is that we don't get to see a lot of the actions that are happening because for whatever reason they're seen as bias now. And so what was once actually an actual narrative or story in journalism now needs to have a counterpoint, because now it's not considered bias when that counterpoint is completely fictional and coming from an emotional place versus that of fact. So I would say that it's the women's movement is strong and it's alive. We just don't see it. Unless you're online. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to quickly note the fact that we're almost oblivious to the fact that there's only a limited, amount of people who actually have access to power and have access to voice through the media. And truly, if you look at the media, even if you look at the representations in pop culture, I would say that it really symbolizes only a fragment of our society. When we watch TV, when we see all the decisions made in our government, we get so frustrated. That's because all of us, the majority of us, all believe that we believe in human equality, we believe in kindness, we believe in mercy and compassion, and that's the foundation, not to sound too patriotic, of this great country. So I think a lot of people can resonate that they feel frustrated when they hear these voices. But just like Wendy said, trust me, those are the 1%. Those are the very few. And going back to money is power. We need to all, and so many, and this comes up in different communities. This comes as a whole. We need to put our money to people who are trying to make change, to people, like there are lobbies out there who try to fight a lot of these decisions that are being made, but their lobby doesn't have enough money. Guess whose lobby does have more money? So this is, again, probably coming out of the whole feminist conversation, but this is really, truly the core of the problem.
There really is so much that we could talk about and discuss and dissect and all the rest of it, but I'm going to give all the panel final word. What is the one thing that you're going to do tomorrow to further the cause of feminism?
I'm going to do my kickboxing class with Groupon and take care of myself, actually. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to hang out with a friend.
Lindsey?
Well, I think I'm going to tell people about this conversation, because I think the more we continue the conversation, the more not only will we learn from it, but the more we'll be able to extend it and make sure others are engaged in it.
Roxanne?
I'm going to write and do everything in my power to make sure that other women writers have the kinds of opportunities that I'm encountering now in my career.
Mona?
I'm going to go back to my classroom tomorrow, and I'm going to continue doing what I do every day, is teaching both boys and girls how about mercy and compassion and equality, and about leadership and making change, and not just being blind followers or just wishing things would change.
Wendy.
I am gonna continue kicking ass, and I just gotta say that this is probably the most diverse panel I've ever been on such an important topic. So kudos to you and to KPCC and Elaine for putting this together, because it's truly remarkable. So thank you.
Thank you. And we turn around and we say thank you to all of you for coming out tonight. We're sorry for keeping you over, but hopefully it's a conversation that you have enjoyed and been engaged in. You can go to kpcc.org. All of this has been recorded. You can sit at your leisure and go over it all again. But do, as Lindsey said, it is about sharing the conversation, and we all are a part of the solution. So thank you so much to Wendy Carrillo, to Mona Ebrahim, to Roxanne Gay, to Lindsey Horvath, and also to Christina Wong. And thank you all, and good night.